September 1938, Czechoslovakia. Adolf Hitler, the Chancellor of Germany, threatens to unleash a European war unless the Sudetenland, a border area of Czechoslovakia on which the ethnic German population lives, is ceded to Germany. The leaders of Britain, France, Italy and Germany hold a conference in Munich between the 29th and 30th of September 1938 and agree to the German annexation of the Sudetenland in exchange for a pledge of peace from Hitler. The Czechoslovaks are not even invited to this conference, and less than 6 months later, on the 15th of March 1939, in violation of the Munich Agreement, Nazi Germany invades and occupies the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia. Adolf Hitler himself arrives in Prague, and on the 16th of March 1939, by a proclamation from Prague Castle, establishes the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. More than 118,000 Jews living in the Protectorate find themselves under Nazi domination. One of them is Fredy Hirsch. Fredy Hirsch was born on the 11th of February 1916 in Aachen, then part of the German Empire. His father Heinrich, a butcher and food wholesaler, died in 1926 after a long illness when Fredy was only 10 years old. Fredy was a Jew, and in 1931 he took over the leadership of the scouting branch of the local Aachen Jewish Youth Association. 1 year later, he participated in founding the Aachen branch of the Jewish Scouting Association of Germany. The organization had Zionist tendencies and a close affiliation with the Maccabi youth movement, which promoted physical education, activity, and sports among the young Jewish generation. The Jewish community of Aachen was well integrated and there was little anti-Semitism. However, this changed in 1933 when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power. The Nazi regime quickly began restricting the civil and human rights of the Jewish people, who, according to the census of the 16th of June 1933, accounted for less than 0.8% of the total population of 67 million. The first concentration camp, Dachau, was established in March 1933, less than 2 months after Hitler became Chancellor. Because of the growing anti-Semitism, 300,000 Jews fled from Nazi Germany between 1933 and 1939. Among them were Fredy's brother Paul and their mother Olga, who fled to Bolivia in 1933. Fredy did not want to emigrate with them. Instead, he remained in Germany and left Aachen the same year, moving first to Frankfurt and then to Dresden, where he worked from 1934 as sports instructor at the Maccabi Youth Movement organization. On the 15th of September 1935, the Nazi regime announced 2 new laws: the Reich Citizenship Law, which declared that only Aryans could be citizens of the Reich, and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor, which forbade marriages and extramarital sexual relations between Germans and Jews, the employment of German maids under the age of 45 in Jewish homes, and the raising of the German flag by Jews. These laws became known as the Nuremberg Laws, or Nuremberg Race Laws, and were the legal basis for the racist anti-Jewish policy in Germany. 13 additional decrees were added to the Nuremberg Laws over the next 8 years. These included the first official definition of who was to be considered a Jew. Jews with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents were considered full-blooded Jews. Hirsch's situation was even more complicated because he was also a homosexual man. In June 1935, the Nazis revised paragraph 175, which was the statute of the German Criminal Code that banned sexual relations between men. The Nazi version of paragraph 175 read, "A man who commits sexual acts with another man or allows himself to be misused for sexual acts by a man will be punished with prison." The revision provided the Nazi regime with the legal tools necessary to prosecute and persecute men engaged in same-sex behavior in much larger numbers than before. In the Nazis' understanding, these men were homosexual offenders and thus criminals and enemies of the state. Himmler believed that targeting these men was necessary for the protection, strengthening, and proliferation of the German people. Police forces used raids, denunciations, and harsh interrogation and torture methods to track down and arrest men whom they believed violated paragraph 175. The Nazi German judicial system also introduced castration into legal practice. As of late 1933, courts could order mandatory castration for certain sexual offenders. However, at least initially, men arrested under paragraph 175 could not be castrated without their supposed consent, but in some cases, men imprisoned under the statute could secure early release if they volunteered to be castrated. In November 1935, Fredy Hirsch, a Jewish homosexual man, moved from Nazi Germany to Czechoslovakia, where he first lived in Prague, and from 1936 to 1939, he lived in Brno and Moravian Ostrava. In Brno, he also met his life partner, the medical student Jan Mautner. Together, they published the Maccabi newspaper. Fredy also organized local Maccabi games and set up youth and adult groups for physical education. Things changed for the worse in Czechoslovakia in late summer 1938, when Hitler annexed the Sudetenland, where the ethnic German population of Czechoslovakia lived. This border area also contained the Czechoslovak army's defensive positions in the event of a war with Germany. On the 15th of March 1939, less than 6 months after the annexation of the Sudetenland, Nazi Germany invaded and occupied the remaining Czech parts of Czechoslovakia, establishing the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, which in contrast to the Sudetenland consisted mostly of ethnic Czechs. The same month, Fredy moved to Prague, where he continued to work for the Maccabi organization. Immediately after the Nazis occupied the whole country, they passed new anti-Jewish laws which were designed to exclude Jews from society and restrict their livelihood. Their bank accounts were frozen, and they were forbidden to sell companies and real estate. These were confiscated and taken over by the Germans. In total, the Germans seized about $500 million worth of Jewish property in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Jewish teachers, lecturers, army officers and doctors were dismissed from government jobs. From the 1st of September 1939, when the Second World War began, Jews were not allowed to stay outdoors after 8 o'clock in the evening. Mautner was unable to complete his degree after 1939 since the Germans closed Czech universities following a student protest. He followed his boyfriend Fredy to Prague in April 1940. From August 1940 onwards, Jewish children were banned from attending public and private schools. From November 1940, new laws, decrees, guidelines and regulations increasingly restricted the civil and human rights of the Jews in the Protectorate. Jews were not allowed to leave their municipalities, even temporarily, without special permission. They were not allowed to visit libraries, theaters and cinemas, pubs or cafes, swimming pools and other sporting and entertainment facilities. Jews had their radio sets taken away and were not even allowed to keep pets. When traveling by city public transport or trains, they were confined to standing in the last carriage. The Jews were even limited in their choice of food, and shopping times for them were limited to 2 hours twice a day, and later to 2 hours only once per day. However, there was still an oasis of fun and hope in the desert of oppression, where Jewish children of Prague could meet and forget all restrictions and suffering in Hagibor, meaning hero in Hebrew. It was a playground which consisted of tennis courts, volleyball courts or running track, where Jewish children could play games and participate in competitions. All of this was organized by Fredy Hirsch, whom the children adored. Children had heard rumors that Fredy was a homosexual, but they did not pay attention to it. It was unimportant for them, and they saw Fredy rather as a great athlete and an example they looked up to. By the time that Hagibor was functioning, the Nazis had forbidden the Jews to travel by public transport altogether, and the Jewish children had to walk from all over Prague, there and back, wearing yellow stars on their coats. The systematic deportation of Jews from the territory of the Protectorate started in October 1941, with the transports to the Lodz ghetto, which was located in German-occupied Poland. By the 3rd of November the same year, 5,000 Jews were deported to the ghetto. Only 277 of those survived. In November 1941, Reinhard Heydrich, the Nazi architect of the Holocaust, established the Theresienstadt ghetto, which was located in the fortress town of Terezin in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. The first transport of Czech Jews arrived in the same month. Fredy Hirsch was sent to Theresienstadt in early December 1941 and was appointed head of the Children and Youth Department of the Jewish ghetto. Fredy insisted on maintaining discipline, regular exercise, and strict hygiene in order to maximize their chances of survival. Children aged 14 and older had to work, and Fredy tried to arrange easier jobs for them, such as working in the vegetable gardens. Hirsch was able to establish a good relationship with the SS guards, which helped him to arrange better housing and food for the children. Even though on a few occasions he was able to remove children from transports to death camps, Almost all the children were eventually deported from Theresienstadt. Fredy himself was sent to Auschwitz in September 1943. The boxcars from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz were so overcrowded that the men, women, children and elderly people could not sit and had to stand for about 2 days until they reached their destination. Aside from a bucket, which was overflowing within a few hours, there were no sanitary facilities. The stench of urine and excrement added to the humiliation and suffering of the deportees. Lacking food and water and proper ventilation, many of the deportees also died before the trains even reached their destinations. Armed police guards accompanied the transport, and they had orders to shoot anyone who tried to escape. The Jews from Theresienstadt were placed into B2B family camp, called Theresienstadt Family Camp Auschwitz, established on the 8th of September 1943. It was one of the 9 camps built by the Germans in the Birkenau subcamp of Auschwitz, and about 18,000 Jews deported from the Theresienstadt ghetto were placed there between 1943 and 1944. They received tattooed numbers on their forearms, but were not subject to selection upon arrival. They were handed old civilian clothes, and their heads were not shaved. The B2B family camp and the Gypsy family camp were the only camps where the men stayed together with the women and children, but slept in separate barracks. It was set up by the Nazis for propaganda purposes, but all other living conditions were the same as in the rest of the camps. Hunger, beatings, hard labor, and limited access to water. The Theresienstadt family camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau consisted of 32 wooden barracks, originally horse stables with no windows, only some narrow apertures under the roofs which let in some air. Each of them housed 300 prisoners. The camp also contained a washroom barracks with a row of taps from which trickled cold, brownish water. One barracks was the latrine, 4 concrete rows with holes, and a strip of sackcloth which divided the men's and women's section. The sackcloth was hiding only the middle part of the person, leaving the face and bottom part exposed to humiliate the prisoners even more. The only food they received was a bowl of soup at midday, and in the evening a piece of bread with a spoonful of margarine or beet jam. The prisoners were so hungry that they could think of nothing but food. Because Fredy was charismatic and spoke German as well as the Nazis and knew how to talk to them, he once again managed to arrange better conditions for the children, including the creation of the children's block. It was located in barracks number 31, and Fredy also became its block elder. The children could stay there during the day until the afternoon roll call. The block was empty except for small stools, where the children sat in age groups in a circle with an adult who was responsible for them. They played guessing games or sang, but were also secretly taught. Of course, teaching was only done orally. There were no toys or pencils. The only aids were some 12 to 14 books, which had been smuggled in by the prisoners responsible for sorting out the luggage of the arriving transports. Hirsch had managed to convince the camp's commander to allow this children's block, claiming it would keep the children busy while their parents had to perform forced labor. Hirsch was also able to obtain some additional food for the children. He arranged for the children's block to be heated and the roll calls for children to be held indoors. Hirsch was extremely strict about the children's hygiene, insisting they wash daily, even in the frigid winter of 1943 to 1944, and conducting regular inspections for lice. Due to his efforts, the mortality rate of the children was nearly 0, compared to the overall mortality of about 25% of the inmates of the family camp in the first 6 months. In February 1944, the Auschwitz resistance movement decoded the meaning of SB6, which was a cryptic abbreviation for the Special Treatment 6, meaning murder in the gas chamber after 6 months. The Jews to be killed were the ones who came in the September transport, together with Fredy Hirsch. In March 1944, the Jews from the September transport were told they would be sent to another camp. They suspected that it was a lie and believed that they would be killed in the gas chambers instead. They were moved to the adjacent A section, where Fredy was given a private cubicle for himself. But some of the Jews decided to start an uprising. They wanted to set the barracks on fire, then cut through the gate and run for their lives. Fredy Hirsch was a member of the uprising, and his task was to start it by blowing his whistle, which he always wore around his neck. On the 8th of March, 1944, 1 hour before the uprising was to begin, Hirsch asked the doctors to give him some tranquilizer, as he was extremely worried about the children. However, the doctors deliberately overdosed Fredy with sleeping pills to prevent him from leading this uprising. The reason was that Dr. Mengele had promised them to be recalled to B2B because he needed them in the hospital. When the time came to blow his whistle, Fredy Hirsch was in a deep sleep and was unable to launch the uprising. The uprising did not take place, and the doctors were indeed recalled to B2B camp, as promised by Dr. Mengele. That same night, still unconscious, Fredy and 3,800 men, women and children from the September transport were loaded onto trucks and driven to the gas chambers, where they found their death. For many years, it was believed that Fredy had committed suicide. However, according to Dieter Kras's testimony, who knew Fredy well for a long time, Fredy would never have escaped responsibility or committed suicide. However, Jan Mautner, Fredy's Jewish boyfriend, did survive the war. He had been sent to Theresienstadt in July 1942, and in December 1943, he too was deported for Auschwitz. In May 1944, Dr. Mengele performed a selection of the inmates to be sent to Germany, and Mautner was among them. He was sent to a subcamp of Sachsenhausen in Germany. He also survived a death march back to Theresienstadt and was liberated shortly after. He then found a new partner, finished his medical degree, and worked as a doctor. Mautner died in 1951 of the tuberculosis he contracted in the camps. When Fredy was carried to his death on a stretcher, he was only 28 years old. Even today, 78 years after his death, this good and brave man, who did everything in his power to shield hundreds of children from the dreadful reality of Auschwitz and make their last months better, is not forgotten. All who knew Fredy speak about him with great respect and recognition, and some affirm that they owe their lives to him. Fredy was a hero who dedicated his life to those who needed it most. And in the end, he died with them. There were many tears shed for Fredy Hirsch.
I know that when I talk about Fredy with other people who were there, they all smile. When they remember Fredy, we smile. He was such a wonderful person. Really, an example for us, a hero. He forbade the people who worked with children to talk about the gas chambers. Everybody knew there were gas chambers, everybody knew that people were being killed there, and that we might be among them. But they were not allowed to talk about it with the children. He was like more like a father. Quite a strict father, I would say. But that was always love. He loved children. Everybody loved him because he was an example for everyone. Although we knew about his homosexuality and didn't pay attention to it, he was a hero in our eyes because he was concerned about children, about sports, about health. He helped the children to get better conditions than the adults, both in Theresienstadt and in Auschwitz. His private preferences were absolutely non-important. Nobody paid attention to that. But we who knew him know positively that he couldn't have, never would have committed suicide. He wouldn't take a sleeping pill to, or some poison to kill himself, never. My husband and I were present in 1989 in Theresienstadt, which was already back a normal little town of Czechoslovakia. Were invited from Israel, where we lived, and we met some of those doctors. And my husband asked them, how did Fredy die? And this is what they told him. We gave him luminal, which is a sleeping pill. We didn't want him to blow the whistle until we are back in the family camp. The doctors who were those people who gave him the pill, from their mouth we heard the truth.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Please help us to create more videos by clicking on the donation link. Thank you, and see you next time on the channel.